Recently, the popular atheist, the cosmic skeptic, or famously known as Alex O'Connor, sat down with a triple PhD debater, Christian debater named John Lennox, who has debated people like Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, and other famous atheists, or the four horsemen of the apocalypse, atheists that were from 2005 to 2010s and 15s. And John Lennox presented to Alex O'Connor the idea of the problem of evil not just being a problem that is only for Christians, but is a problem that everybody is trying to solve. And the question is, what is the best worldview that is going to actually even answer the question, problem of evil? Because in atheism, why is it a problem? It's only a problem because we know that there's something wrong innately why evil even exists. Because if only good existed, we wouldn't have an issue with it. It would just be what it is. But there's both things going on here in the world, and there's so many worldviews that Alex O'Connor has been trying to understand from his atheist point of view, but surprisingly, he actually admits that he's an agnostic in this new interview. And so that means Alex O'Connor has stepped from atheism, total rejection, and saying that there's no evidence for God, to, hey, maybe there is connectivity and consciousness in all life, and everything is connected, we're all connected somehow, and maybe there is some kind of source that animates life. And so that's actually one of the amazing things that he got out of the interview. It's not really a debate, but it is a conversation with John Lennox, who has pretty much been tested in his mettle regarding all the hardcore atheist questions, like why did God order the killing of the Canaanites? Why is the problem of evil? How do you know Christianity is the true belief system amongst Hinduism and Buddhism? So the thing is you're going to see a few important clips from this conversation about the problem of evil and how John Lennox is trying to redirect the question of problem of evil to help us understand that even though there is evil still today, God actually, if he does exist, God actually steps into the problem of evil and works it out with us. Now, he gives an answer to the fact that God gives the answer that there is eternal life after this, that even though our bodies die, our souls live on forever, that there is something beyond our physical body, which Alex O'Connor has a hard time agreeing to, because he's thinking, well, there's no proof of a soul and there's evidences of near-death experiences, but where's the proof of the soul? But you're going to hear some of these things that John Lennox challenges Alex O'Connor as, and even if you're an atheist, I believe these questions are really good for you yourself to ask, because the point of this is to understand that we don't know anything really. We know a sliver information. So true atheism is impossible to exist, because under true atheism, you'd have to know 100% of all knowledge in the universe. But since we don't, then a true atheist cannot be a true atheist. It's actually agnostic, because we don't know all the knowledge in the universe, and we don't even know ourselves as well as we think we might. And so it's more honest to say you're an agnostic than an atheist, because what that implies that you have all knowledge in the world to say there's no God. The big problem with Alex is it's that his intellectualism keeps him from actually, because he's just been in his mind for a lot of his young life and now into adulthood. And so he hasn't really experienced the hardships that make somebody question their theoretical worldviews. And so it's good that Alex has been asking a lot of questions, interviewing everybody from Frank Turek, John Lennox, Ruslan Delos of Wisdom, all these Christians and atheists as well, to try to figure out what the base of knowledge is, whether there is a God or not. But unfortunately, personal issue for him, because for him to deny that he knows all the answers, knows everything, to say that, hey, I really don't know anything, and I think that I need God in my life, is actually a very personal thing for him to even admit, because that means he would have to surrender all the things that he worships on the altar of intellectualism. And so the thing is that God gave us a mind. Even if you don't believe in God, we have a mind, but we can also worship our mind, worship our cars, worship our jobs, and worship our legacy too. So the question at the end of the day becomes, who do you say that I am? That's what Jesus asked his disciples when many of the other followers stopped following him. And that's the question that's been asked for 2,000 years. Who is this Jesus? Is he the historical Jesus, the false Jesus of the Gnostic Gospels that came 150, 200 years later? Only the spiritual Jesus? Or is this Jesus of the myth? But the question still keeps being asked, who is this Jesus? Why is he so important? Why did he claim to be one with God and God in human form? Why did Thomas the disciple said, my Lord and my God, and Jesus accepted it? Why was Jesus called the Alpha and Omega? So these questions are important to answer, and Alex is trying to get to the cusp of it by asking the question, is there a creator? So let's watch this video and see how John and him interact.
Are science and religion in conflict?
I don't really think so. And I've had that impression actually for a very long time, in the sense that when I was at school, I started reading C.S. Lewis. My father gave me some of his books, and it was very interesting reading those books, because his take on the history of science, which was based on Alfred North Whitehead actually, was, to quote more or less, men became scientific because they expected law in nature, and they expected law in nature because they believed in the lawgiver. I do think there is a conflict, though, just to explain a little bit further, but it's not between science and faith in God. And I often illustrate this by thinking of the Nobel Prize in Physics. Because, take for example Higgs, Peter Higgs, who won it, Scotsman, atheist, brilliant physicist. And then there's another person I know, Bill Phillips, an American Nobel Prize winner for physics and a Christian. And what that tells me, Alex, really is this, that their difference isn't in the realm of physics at all, or science, it's in worldview. And I see a real conflict between the theistic worldview and the atheistic worldview, and there are scientists on both sides. And so I feel that if we take that on board, we can make a more sensible exploration of this whole, well, I think it's a myth, and a lot of historians do as well, that science and religion are necessarily in conflict. I think as a final codicil, I would say it depends what religion you're talking about. I'm talking about the Judeo-Christian worldview, because science conflicts with a lot of religions. Within computer science and biology, nowadays people use that kind of terminology. They use computer language in biology, and they use ordinary language about words in computer science, because there's a very intimate relationship. In that, I think what many biologists say to me, and in reading their material, that it's word-like in the sense that the DNA letters code for the amino acids which code for, that's the word, which code for the proteins, which are the building blocks of life. So if you like to say it's an analogy, but it's an extremely powerful analogy, because at the very base level, you're communicating information. Now, this is a difficult area.
Yes.
I'm very well aware that if you ask me, what do you mean by information? It's like so many things, we don't exactly know how to define it.
Yeah.
It's like Augustine said about time. Everybody knows what it is until they're asked to define it.
Yes.
It's one of those things. But one of the things I believe that has come out of physics, although that's debated up to today, is that information, in the sense of we live in an information-based world, is not derivable from physics and chemistry. Now, that to me is a massive block in the way of a materialistic explanation of life, mathematics, everything else. Because if information is not in the end material, then no material explanation is going to work for it. And it seems to me the death blow to materialism in the ultimate sense has been given by physics in talking about information not being reducible to physics and chemistry. My view, therefore, is to go on that side. It's as evidence-based, best explanation. What is the best explanation of what we see? And it seems to me that the notion of a creative God is not a gap explanation. We can't explain this, therefore God did it. No, it's in the nature of the thing. How can I illustrate that? If I look up, there I see a sign that says exit, let's say. Now, I immediately deduce that whatever natural processes, mechanical processes have gone into production of that sign, there's a mind behind it. Just 4 letters will tell me that. But that is not a mind of the gaps that I'm postulating a mind because I don't know what ultimately caused it. The fact is we do know in our human experience where it comes from. And by analogy, it seems to me that therefore the best explanation of the word-based universe, as I put it, is that there is a word ultimately who is God. Now, that's only one strand of evidence for my belief in God.
Yes, I mean, for me, the most powerful argument for the existence of God has long since been the argument for the existence of God from the number of arguments for the existence of God. It seems like anywhere you look, you can construct one. There's an argument from biology and consciousness or beauty or contingency, the existence of this microphone. It's quite phenomenal in that respect. But with regards to this, and I want to be clear for our listeners, when you point to the fire exit sign and talk about how we know that has a mind behind it, you're not drawing an analogy there to evolution directly. People might be misunderstanding you. Like, you're not saying, well, because I know that had a mind, I know that biology must have a mind. I think you're saying something more specific, which is that saying that there was a mind behind this word exit is not just plugging in a gap because you've got no better thing to put inside of it.
That's what
you've instead got a reason. There's something in the nature of the thing which gives you reason to think that a mind created it. Now, I think I agree with you in saying that to say God is behind evolution is not, at least necessarily, a God of the gaps argument. I'm happy to say that there is very plausible reason for somebody to look at the majesty of the natural world and say, and the language coding of DNA, and say, there must be some intelligence behind this. For me, the question is then, well, is that argument or is that consideration convincing enough? I also agree with what you said about like language. I described it as an analogy, but when you mentioned computer coding, and I thought about binary code, a series of zeros and ones, which of course is only analogous to the words that I'm speaking in English, but to say that it's not really a language would be perhaps a sort of confusion of terms.
I think so.
Perhaps there is some kind of intelligent creator of this first this first sort of prime biological being. Fine. If we then sort of track this process of evolution, the reason why a human mind can't create a bird is because it's not done by a direct, intelligent design. It's done by a sort of series of billions of years of trial and error, such that I could create a bird in the sense that if I could somehow set up some simple beginning conditions, I could then just sort of let it go in its environment, and in billions of years it would turn into a bird. The important thing is getting it going. That's, to me, where the really important question is. It's not so much in the process of evolution that I discover something
that's
amazing.
Interesting, because to my mind, getting it going is one of the hardest things. The origin of life is much harder because you don't have life to give you all
I'm
that
agreeing with you.
variation.
I mean to say that to me is where the question is, like this mystery of how on earth would you get this initial being. But for me, what I'm saying is that once you have that, and even if you need God to get that, I don't think you then require concept of intelligent design to describe the process that then goes on as it begins to replicate in environments that select for different qualities. If you know,
you've got God already to start it off. You've got God,
exactly,
and perhaps you needn't worry too much about the rest.
I'd really like to know then why it is that in the popular imagination, this assumption has developed that intellectualism, scientists and philosophers and the academy is sort of tied up with atheism. That once you become a bit intellectual and you start learning about stuff, and if you actually read the Bible, you'll be talked out of all of that. We've already talked about how you think that's like just untrue, but then why that association in the popular mind?
That, I think, is a complex question to which there are several different answers that one can think of immediately. First of all, in this country, there has been media bias, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
There's much more communication of atheism. Secondly, there's been, in our recent lifetimes, the so-called new atheist movement, which has picked up a lot of people, I feel. And if you want to trace that back, you're going back to the Enlightenment in a way, forgetting the evil side of the Enlightenment and just sticking with the intellectual side. And also the idea that is either consciously or unconsciously perpetuated by some scientists that science is the only way to truth, which we call scientism.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a number of people around here that believe that. Peter Atkins, whom I've debated several times, and you must know very well, holds to that view. And to my mind, it's almost amusingly false, because the statement "science is the only way to truth" is not a statement of science, and therefore, if it's true, it's false. It's logically incoherent. But that impression has been given, and I can't explain it any more than perhaps there's also an element of the zeitgeist, where the culture is at, and disgust with some of the aspects of public Christianity. And, the country I come from, Ireland, but also here, the number of scandals, and people often say to me, well, how could you be a Christian, you coming from Ireland with all the fighting there was, let alone the moral scandals? And I think that's a real question. And my response to it is, and I talked to Christopher Hitchens at great length about this, and he took the point in the end, is that what I said to Christopher, Christopher, I don't understand you, because if you'd really understood what Jesus said, and said to the religious rogues that were around him, you'd be on his side, not fighting against him. Because all your objections to bad religion, I share. And Christ criticized them. And I said, you talk about Christianity being cause for war. Well, that was what Christ was put on trial for, that he was promoting terrorism. And Pilate declared him innocent because, and here's the interesting thing, that I remember discussing with Christopher very clearly. I said, Pilate was threatened by any threat to Rome. And was Jesus a king who was trying to overthrow him politically? And Jesus' answer was, well, I am a king, but not in the sense you mean. To this end, I was born, to this end I came into the world, that I might bear witness to the truth. And Pilate said, what is truth? And went out and said, Jesus is innocent, because he was bright enough to see what most of us can see, that the one thing you cannot do by force and violence is impose truth, especially if it's truth about salvation, peace with God, forgiveness, a new life, and all this kind of thing.
Yes. And
therefore, the thing that answers it is, and I'm very strong on this, that my fellow countrymen who took up arms, whether on Protestant or Catholic side, to defend Christ and his message, are not Christian, because they're disobeying what Christ said, not following him.
Yes.
And I think that makes a lot of confusion, and has done in the past. And another thing I often say, well, the existence of false coinage doesn't prove that the real stuff doesn't exist, but may make it hard to find. And But as you will have noticed, I see encouraging signs on the horizon, because many young people, particularly in Gen Alpha, are beginning to come back and be interested in God and exploring these questions, not so much against the background of what science says or doesn't say, but against the much more cultural background of meaning and purpose in life. And that heartens me. I find that immensely encouraging.
The focus has shifted. And I think, there was I think, was it the Bible Society that just released a study about young people going back to church
Bible Society,
at a quite incredible increase of people? And it wasn't, I think the thing that surprised me was not just that people were beginning to like believe in God again or something, but to attend church.
Yes.
Which is quite a thing in itself. I mean, I agree with people like Justin Brierley when they say that, I don't know if the statistics bear this out, but I can kind of feel something in the air, like the conversation's shifting a little bit.
Yes.
And I was sort of like, okay, I can feel that too. But if church attendance is going up, I think that's quite an important indicator. These discussions, I agree. The important question is, like with Christianity, Jesus. And for me, it's quite straightforward, as I feel like it might be for you too, in that if somebody says, well, what about this thing that these Christians did? If the question is whether Christianity is true, then the question is wholly, would Jesus have condoned or commanded such a thing? And if the answer is no, then it's not an objection at all. But the fear that someone like Christopher Hitchens has is that the kind of certainty that comes along with that conviction, which, as you've just explained, like when somebody has a religious experience, that is what compels them. And it happens in a way that is indescribable and is immune to any kind of scientific or philosophical inquiry. But that certainty can then spill over into areas where it doesn't belong, such as certainty on doctrine, certainty on moral practices specific to our current time that weren't discussed by Jesus, for example. And I think that's the kind of fear that he had. And you've debated these people. I think you, in a way, you were an important part of the new atheist movement as one of the key figures in opposition. You've debated at this Oxford Union. I should mention we are filming this in the Oxford Union, who have very gracefully lent us this wonderful Goodman library. They're currently fundraising for a restoration project of some beautiful paintings they have at the top of their old library. So for people listening, there's going to be a link in the description for a fundraiser to help keep this wonderful building and this institution of debate and discussion in action. That's in the description. You've debated in the chamber across the way. You've debated Christopher Hitchens. You've debated Richard Dawkins. What do you think was going on with New Atheism? Why was that something that was so popular, and why was it so difficult for someone like Christopher Hitchens to see that all of his criticisms were journalistic? They were about religion as an institution on earth. And what would you say to quell his concerns that it is that religious impulse, that experience that somebody knows they have God on their side, that gives them the license to do all kinds of evil?
Yes. Looking back, Alex, I wish I'd had more time with Hitchens. I liked Hitchens.
Mm-hmm.
And answering your question is difficult because I sense its thrust and its power, actually, because it seems to me a very valid thing that certainty can become what I call fundamentalist certainty. And I think that's what you're referring to, where people are so certain that their receptors are completely closed to anything else.
Right.
And that justifies almost any kind of behavior. And that's appalling. And I asked myself, what has saved me from that? Because as I sit talking to you, I have that sense of certainty of my relationship with God. I think what has helped me immensely in life is that I've been very privileged to how shall I put it? I've been prepared for the last 70 years or more to be vulnerable. In other words, I'm always prepared to question what I believe. And I have seen in my life the sadness that comes about when people become fundamentalist in any direction. And I was very honoured to be invited by the British Academy some years ago to give a lecture on, wait for it, scientific fundamentalism, which I think is a much better expression than scientism.
Okay.
Science is the only way to truth. And what fascinated me that day, I was terrified, going into the British Academy and all the academicians there and so on, was the positive response was absolutely amazing. The talk was eventually published in a book. But I've always been afraid of that. I suppose because I was brought up in a culture where my own family suffered bombing because of that kind of attitude. My father ran a business, and just your listeners and people watching this will be interested to know that in a country where there's huge tension between Catholics and Protestants that was fomented by a lot of extremists on both sides, my dad employed equally, as far as he could, Protestants and Catholics in his shop in the centre of one of the most difficult towns in the country. And because of that, I said, Dad, this is really dangerous. Why do you do it? And I'll never forget his answer. He said, son, Scripture teaches us that every man and woman, irrespective of what they believe, is made in the image of God, and I intend to treat them like that. Now, that was amazing. That and the fact that they let me think were two of the biggest things they could have given me. But that as a moral guide has been very important to me in life. In other words, translating it, I can learn from everybody. And when I arrived in Cambridge, week number 1, I looked around looking for someone who did not share my background. And I've been doing it ever since. And I think, and it might sound arrogant to say this, but I think the way in which God helped save me from that kind of cocksuredness that legitimizes any behavior is that I'm constantly prepared to listen, seriously listen, to people that don't share my worldview. And so when I debated the people you've mentioned, I prepared, read all their books so far as I could, and thought through how seriously am I to take this. And I think my confidence, and I prefer to use the word confidence than being cocksure, has grown because of those exposures. But I'm still ready at the age of 81 to take the argument seriously because many other people are facing these arguments and discussions. And my little contribution, I think, to the debate is to show that there's another side.
I'm not a Christian, and that has a lot to do with my lack of trust in the reliability of not so much the Gospels as a whole, but particularly things like the resurrection narratives. But this team of religion is bad and evil and corrupting of thought, I'm not on that.
Well, nor am I.
And I'm also not on the boat of saying that God doesn't exist and religion is false. I'm more of an agnostic these days, but I tend to take a more critical tone because that's just sort of who I am and what I do. But I think I remain quite thoroughly agnostic, which is one of the reasons it's quite difficult to interrogate my beliefs, because there are so few of them that are solidly held. But one of them would be, for example, so there's the reliability of Scripture, but when you're talking about theism as opposed to Christianity, one of them really is the problem of evil. I do find it mysterious and bewildering.
Oh, it's the hard question for any worldview.
But then one of the reasons why it actually comes up so little is because it almost feels trivial to bring up because it's the obvious point. It is the argument.
Yeah.
And it's been discussed ad nauseum.
I will say one thing about it, because whenever this comes up, it often comes up in terms, whether people who are discussing it realize it or not, to go back a long way to people like Lucretius and so on. Surely a good God, an all-powerful God should, etc., do this or that. And I've reflected on that a lot, because we've all had endless arguments like that have never come to a satisfactory conclusion.
Right.
And I've started to think about that fact, because as a mathematician, you get problems that people have attacked for centuries and have got nowhere. And the way mathematicians react to that is that they say, perhaps we're asking the wrong question. And I think I found that helpful in the following way, and I'll be brief. It's this, that what faces everybody is a mixed picture. I call it beauty and bombs. In other words, we look at the world, we see some beautiful things and we see some horrible things, especially these days. And any worldview has got to take that into account. That is a fact. And we can argue as long as we like about the theoretical side, if God is good and all-powerful, why this and why that, why the other? And we never come to a satisfactory answer. So I propose another question, equally difficult, but I think it gets us a bit further. Granted that it's like that, is there any evidence anywhere that there is a God who understands it, and to such an extent that I can feel, not that I've got an answer, but that I can see there's a possibility of coming to some peace about it? And my answer to that is that yes, I think there is. And it's the fact that the God presented in the Christian Gospels is a God who in that sense has suffered, because the central claim of Christianity is that God became human and that Christ is God. So, crudely put, what is God doing on a cross? Well, one thing it certainly shows me is that God has not remained distant from human suffering, but has become part of it. And the very interesting thing, Alex, is that in 2011, I arrived in New Zealand 3 days after the earthquake, and I had to meet people who were really going through grief and so on. And I talked in those terms, and I'll never forget when I'd finished talking to the largest congregation this particular place has ever seen, I think, there was a little piece of paper pushed into my hand that said, I lost my husband in the earthquake. And what you said about the cross has given me the first glimmer of hope. And it ties together something you said just a few minutes ago, which I'd love to discuss in detail, but it would have to be another time. If the cross were the end, we'd never have heard of Jesus. And so for me, the resurrection becomes the central thing. And it's what the apostles preached. It's what Jesus claimed. It's evidence that he was who he claimed to be. And it has those two dimensions. It has the intellectual dimension. How can you possibly believe that Jesus rose from the dead when we know the laws of nature? Hume. And secondly, what is the evidence in terms of personal experience of encounter with Christ who is alive? So that would be possibly a discussion for another time.
Yes, I think so.
I hope you guys enjoyed some of the questions that John tackled with Alex O'Connor. And the biggest thing to think about is that Alex actually appreciated how John interacted with him, because he understood that John wasn't saying that God of the gaps argument that a lot of atheists love to use, that we Christians say, well, because of this, God, the gaps have to be filled by God. But the thing is that John Lennox used an intelligent understanding, logical thinking of, if you see an exit sign, you know that there was a mind that put their exit to give you information to go out that door if they're in a case of emergency or in case you need to use that exit. So the thing is that that's not God of the gaps argument. It's not even a leap in logic. It's just a logical deduction from what we see in everyday life happens. So why wouldn't there be a logical deduction that there's a human maker, that there's an animal maker, that there's a planet maker, that all these things didn't just come out and about by themselves, that there is actually a presence that created all these things, a consciousness that permeates all life. And this consciousness isn't even just, us, like, the pantheists say, but it's outside of us, but it actually can be within us, and we can experience this ultimate intelligent consciousness called God, who created everything. And this consciousness is organic, and it permeates through everything in the universe. And so God, if the Bible is correct, and Alex O'Connor still doesn't understand that, he doesn't like the idea of the fact that God allowed for certain rules regarding slavery in the ancient Near East. He doesn't understand certain things, that the Bible was not written to us, it was written for us. He's not understanding that these things are not God's perfect order, but that God worked within flawed humanity to accomplish his goal of bringing the Messiah for the forgiveness of sins, which will accomplish all the other things, like getting rid of chattel slavery, getting rid of other things, honoring women as they were supposed to be honored, even seen in Genesis chapter 2 and 3, before sin came into the world. So there's things that Alex does not understand that seem very logical to him to make deductions from. And just like he doesn't understand why John Lennox makes the deductions that he does. But in reality, Alex is just like all of us, a kid, whether a guy or a girl, we're all kids, compared to the history of the world, we're all little tiny kids. Compared to a universal creator, we're all little kids. We're all trying to grasp our way into this world and this meaning. We're trying to find meaning. We're trying to find love. At the end of the day, Alex O'Connor is really searching for love. He might not admit it to me. He might not admit it to himself, but I know he's searching for purpose and love. But the only thing, Alex, if you ever see this, is love is found through God alone. If you're watching this and you're an atheist, or you're struggling with understanding, well, what is love? What is truth? Well, love and truth was found in the person of Jesus. It's not a concept. It's not a philosophy. It's actually a person. Love is a person. Love is Jesus Christ, the man Jesus in the Bible that said, come to me that you may have life abundantly, that I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes through the Father, aka God, but through me. And so the thing is that how can you experience love and life and truth if you don't go to the source? And I'm telling you, I've gone to the source of love, and I've experienced an explosion of love in my life that I never had before, when I've experienced other things. And so if you haven't done that, I pray for you that you would come to experience the love of God in such a way that it would transform you, answer all your important questions that you need to answer, and put you on the path of eternal life, because God is life. So when you experience his love coming into you, you will have eternal life automatically, because his life is going to be within you. That seed will be planted. So I pray that you do that. And God bless you guys. Let me know what you think in the comments, or this video bless you, and what you think about the debate with Alex O'Connor, John Lennox, and what you think maybe they should have talked about more, some questions that you have that should have been answered. God bless you.